In the quiet lineage pages of Israel, the name of Jabez appears briefly, yet powerfully, in the first book of Chronicles. To most, he is just a note in a long genealogy, but for those who delve into his story, Jabez emerges as a figure marked by the weight of his name and his quest for a different destiny. Jabez was born at a time when names carried enormous significance. In ancient Hebrew tradition, a person's name was more than just an identifier. It was a reflection of the essence or destiny expected for that individual. Unlike other names that conveyed virtues, hopes, or blessings, the name Jabez was a bitter and painful reminder. His mother named him this because his birth had brought her great suffering. From birth, Jabez carried an identity linked to pain, a condition that seemed inescapable. Throughout his childhood, he grew up in a society where a name was the first and perhaps most powerful impression a person could convey. He saw other children around him with names that resonated with joyful meanings and hopes. Each time someone spoke his name, it was as if the word pain was brought back into his reality, a constant reminder of the circumstances of his birth. However, even though his name associated him with sorrow, Jabez began to develop a different feeling. In his moments of introspection, he questioned whether it might be possible to change the destiny associated with his name. Could he transform a life destined for pain into something more meaningful and blessed? This restless desire grew within him, along with the need to find answers. As Jabez grew, the meaning of his name became an increasingly evident burden. In his village, he was known not only as a quiet young man, but as someone whose very name seemed to carry a mark. He remembered when, as a child, he overheard his mother explaining to other women why she had named him Jabez, the son of sorrow. That was one of his earliest memories, and even without fully understanding it, he felt the impact of having his identity tied to a moment of suffering. While other boys bore names like Eliezer, God is help, or Nathan, gift of God, Jabez carried a cold word, a reminder of discomfort. He heard the mothers of other boys calling them with affection, while his own name sometimes provoked whispers. Poor Jabez, some murmured. He began to realize that his name carried a story of its own, one that seemed to predestine his life to the shadow of inevitable pain. Over the years, Jabez became more introspective. Though he wished to live a simple and peaceful life like anyone else, he felt trapped by something that wasn't the result of his choices, but rather a condition imposed on him at birth. On nights when he looked up at the starry sky, Jabez wondered if there was a greater purpose for the pain he bore. Was he destined only to live under the weight of his name, or was there a way out? The villagers expected little of Jabez. To them, he was a silent, sorrowful representation of a life seemingly condemned from the beginning. Sometimes he wondered if he should simply accept this condition, letting himself be carried by what his name suggested. But within him, something resisted surrender. A small spark of hope refused to be extinguished. He believed, however faintly, that his fate could change. As Jabez reflected on his life, he began to feel a need to break free from the burden his name had placed upon him. This internal struggle, though silent, intensified over time, growing alongside his desire to live a different life. He began to consider that perhaps, instead of running from his identity, he could confront it, seeking a new path. In the depths of his soul, Jabez felt that this liberation could only come through something greater than himself. If there was a way out of his condition, he believed he would only find it through the God his people worshipped, the one who, they said, had the power to make the unlikely a reality. Time passed, and Jabez's desire for a different life grew stronger. He observed those around him, watching their lives unfold with hope and purpose. Unlike him, these men and women seemed to walk confidently, supported by the positive meanings of their names and by the expectations the community placed upon them. Jabez, on the other hand, felt trapped in an identity that seemed inevitable, with no real prospects for change. Each day, he bore the burden of being the son of sorrow. Jabez knew he could not alter the past or the reason his mother had given him that name, but he was increasingly unwilling to believe that he was destined only for a life marked by sadness. He began to dream of a future in which he would be remembered for something beyond his name, a future where he would not live in the shadow of his birth, but instead be illuminated by new accomplishments. The village where he lived offered little opportunity for change or progress. Social roles were well established, and few dared to challenge what seemed to be their place as determined by tradition. Yet Jabez began to think differently. He believed that there was something more in store for him, something that transcended others' expectations. This thought accompanied him in silence, growing within him like a seed cast into soil, waiting for the season to bloom. There were moments when doubt tried to overwhelm him. He wondered if it might be easier to accept the destiny that seemed imposed upon him and live accordingly. What could he, a young man known only for a dark name, hope for in life? But even in the face of these uncertainties, a voice inside him urged him to seek something greater. This small voice seemed to challenge him to break through the limits that his name and circumstances had placed around him. Jabez believed that this voice came from God, a calling that encouraged him to rise up and fight for a renewed life. As the days passed, Jabez's determination solidified. He wanted not only to thrive but also to find a purpose, something that would give him peace and meaning. Gradually, he realized that in order for his life to truly change, he would need to do something uncommon, something beyond his own strength. He felt compelled to turn directly to God, the one who had the power to change destinies and rewrite stories. His decision was made. Then Jabez gathered the courage to do something that would forever alter the course of his life. He decided that instead of living under the weight of sorrow, he would seek God's blessing to transform his future. One night, after a day of reflection, he knelt in silence and prayed with all the sincerity in his heart. This prayer, simple and profound, carried all the desires he had nurtured over the years. It was a quiet cry for a better life, for a reality that transcended the name he bore. That night, alone under the starry sky, Jabez closed his eyes and focused on a prayer that had been forming in his heart for a long time. He knew that this prayer needed to be complete and sincere, as it was a request for nothing less than a new life. For the first time, Jabez would dare to ask God for a transformation that would break the destiny of sorrow that seemed to mark him from birth. He was not merely seeking comfort, but a radical change, a divine turning point that would make his life mean more than the reflection of the name he bore. Jabez began by asking for a blessing. "O God, bless me indeed," he whispered. His request was simple, yet filled with meaning. He knew that a blessing was not just about material possessions or luck. It was a special favor from God, a force that would bring joy, peace, and purpose into his life. Jabez wanted this blessing to free him from the emotional chains of his past and give him a sense of dignity and worth. He wanted God to see him beyond the name sorrow and bless him in a way that would transform his identity forever. Next, he dared to ask for something even greater: "Enlarge my territory." These words held within them a request for growth and expansion. Jabez was not only referring to lands or physical possessions. He longed for opportunities that would expand his life and allow him to go beyond the boundaries that had limited him until now. He wanted a territory of his own, a space where he could flourish, where his name and past would not restrain him. This request symbolized his hope for a better future and his belief that God could grant him this possibility. The third request was of great importance to him: "Let your hand be with me." This request reflected Jabez's deep desire to feel God's presence and support in every aspect of his life. He knew that he could not transform his destiny on his own. He needed divine guidance and strength to lead and protect him. This request was an act of faith, a total surrender of his path into God's hands, trusting that divine power would sustain him at every moment. Finally, Jabez made the most personal request of all: "Keep me from evil, so that I will not suffer." In this last request, Jabez expressed his deepest pain and his desire to be protected not only from physical dangers but also from the emotional wounds he carried. He longed to be freed from the pain his name suggested and from the suffering that seemed to be part of his existence. Jabez wanted a life of peace and protection, where evil and sadness would not dictate his path. As he finished his prayer, Jabez felt a deep sense of peace. He had opened his heart to God and asked for everything he desired with his whole soul. For the first time, he believed that his future could be different and that sorrow did not have to define his life. He trusted that God had heard his words and that the answer would come, somehow, transforming his life into something completely new. In the days following that fervent prayer, Jabez felt something different. He couldn't quite describe the feeling, but there was a lightness in his spirit, a hope that had once seemed distant. He went about his daily tasks with a more confident heart, as though simply surrendering to God had freed him from part of the burden he had been carrying. For the first time, he experienced the possibility that his request might truly be granted, that sorrow was no longer his only reality. The changes began subtly. People around him, who had previously taken little notice of his presence, began to observe him with respect. He found new opportunities for work, expanding his responsibilities and his place within the community. Gradually, Jabez realized that his territory, once so limited, was truly expanding, both symbolically and practically. It wasn't just about land or material possessions. It was the broadening of his worth, his position, and his influence. As time passed, he noticed that obstacles seemed to lose their power. Those who once saw him as the son of sorrow now viewed him as a man whose life had been transformed. Prosperity and security replaced uncertainty, and Jabez felt the presence of God guiding him at every step. He began to understand that God's hand was indeed upon him, guiding his decisions, supporting him through difficulties, and shielding him from the pitfalls that once surrounded him. However, the divine answer was not only evident in outward things. What Jabez most noticed was the change within himself. The confidence he felt and the peace that filled his heart were clear signs that God had responded to his request for blessings and protection from evil. He felt freer, more assured that sorrow was no longer the defining element of his existence. The shadow of pain that had once accompanied him was replaced by a light of hope and faith. As Jabez continued on his journey, he increasingly became an example of transformation for those around him. His life, once marked by sorrow, was now a testament to what faith and true surrender could achieve. He was no longer remembered for the meaning of his name, but for the strength his story conveyed. His courage to seek God with sincerity and boldness inspired others to do the same, even those who, like him, carried difficult marks from their pasts. Thus, God's response to Jabez's prayer was far more than a change in circumstances. It was a transformation that reached every part of his life, changing him from the inside out. The pain he once feared was replaced by peace, the emptiness was filled by divine presence, and his name, once a symbol of suffering, was now remembered as a testament to redemption and renewal. Years passed, and Jabez's life became a living example of transformation. The young man once remembered as the son of sorrow was now respected by the entire community. His story had spread beyond his village, reaching other regions. People came to him seeking advice, eager to understand how he had managed to overcome the limitations that fate, and even his own name, had seemed to impose on him. Jabez's life had become a powerful message of hope for those facing personal struggles and challenges. Now older and wiser, Jabez recognized that the blessings he received were a gift of divine grace, not something he could have earned on his own. He shared with others the importance of faith, humility, and sincere prayer. In his words, he emphasized the power of seeking God with spirit and truth, without fear of asking for what the heart truly desired. To Jabez, his prayer had been an act of courage and faith, a complete and sincere surrender that transformed his destiny. Over time, Jabez's prayer began to be repeated by many who sought renewal in their lives. Each word of that prayer carried a powerful request that resonated in the hearts of the afflicted, souls longing for God's presence in their journey. "O God, bless me, enlarge my territory, let your hand be with me, and keep me from evil. These words echoed in the lives of those who, like Jabez, faced their own sorrows and limitations. The impact of Jabez's story was so profound that generations later, his name was still remembered, not as a symbol of sorrow, but as an example of unwavering faith. He became an inspiration to the people of Israel and to all who would read his name in the scriptures. The brief account of his prayer in Chronicles came to represent the hope that, no matter how difficult the beginning, each person could seek a future of blessings and protection with God's help. Jabez did not leave behind material wealth or a legacy of worldly power and influence. His true legacy was a faith that overcame barriers and transcended pain. Jabez's story became a symbol of resilience and spiritual renewal. He was remembered as the man who dared to challenge the limitations imposed by his past, becoming living proof that God's love and blessings could change lives. Those who knew him no longer remembered his sorrow, but rather the peace and strength he radiated. And so, from generation to generation, the prayer of Jabez continued to inspire the afflicted, to strengthen the weak, and to bring hope to the discouraged. His name, once synonymous with suffering, became a reminder that faith is capable of redefining any destiny. He left the world with a message that no one is defined solely by their past, and that everyone can, with sincerity and faith, seek a new beginning. The story of Jabez is not merely an ancient tale of overcoming adversity. It carries timeless lessons that resonate deeply with anyone who has ever felt the weight of limitations or past scars. Jabez's request, a simple, direct prayer, has crossed centuries as a symbol of the courage to seek something greater and the trust in a God who listens to sincere hearts. His life is a powerful reminder that no one is bound by what has already been, but that there is always room for a new direction, with divine help. Many who read the story of Jabez identify with his quest for redemption. His prayer, which begins with a request for blessing, represents the desire to overcome hardship and live with purpose. In today's world, where so many face emotional, financial, or spiritual challenges, Jabez's example teaches us that we can ask God to bless us with everything we need to grow. His request reminds us that seeking God's blessing is a fundamental step for anyone wanting a fulfilling future, breaking through barriers set by past circumstances. When Jabez asked God to enlarge his territory, he demonstrated a vision for growth and expansion that goes beyond physical possessions. This request symbolizes the desire to open doors, see new opportunities, and develop all the potential God has given us. Today, this prayer applies to anyone who wants to transcend limitations and expand their horizons, whether in work, relationships, or spiritual journeys. Asking God for expansion is a declaration that we desire more than a limited existence and that we want to move forward, helping others in the process. Jabez's third request, that your hand be with me, touches on one of the deepest aspects of faith. He longed for a constant presence of God, a steady guidance amid life's uncertainties. Today, many also cry out for this divine companionship, wishing that God would walk alongside them, guiding their decisions and protecting them from the dangers life presents. This request reflects a healthy dependence and absolute trust in God, for with Him by our side, we face the unknown with courage and determination. Finally, Jabez asked to be kept from evil so that he would not suffer. This request reveals his understanding that not all pain is necessary, and that God can shield us from needless suffering and from the evils that threaten our peace. By asking for protection, Jabez teaches us the importance of seeking a life of peace and well-being, trusting that God is able to protect us from negative influences and dangers beyond our control. Thus, the prayer of Jabez has become a spiritual guide for those who want more out of life. It shows us that we are not defined by our past, that we have the right to ask God for help, and that our journey can be transformed when we surrender it to Him. Jabez's story encourages us to seek a destiny that goes beyond labels, pains, and imposed limitations. It challenges us to pray boldly, believe deeply, and live with the assurance that God hears us and is willing to transform our story. This video is a great encouragement for you to seek God more in prayer. It is right to seek the Lord and ask Him to grant us a better life here. But remember to submit to God's will. It is always good, perfect, and pleasing. Although we can ask God for the desires of our heart, He will always do what is best for us and will not necessarily give you exactly what you have asked for. In this video we've given more context to the life of Jabez, but the Holy Bible doesn't give us that much detail about his life. The Word of God only gives us what is necessary to understand this story: prayer and dependence on God. If you don't receive riches on this earth, and your life doesn't prosper the way you want it to, remember, the greatest wealth we can receive from God is having His Son Jesus Christ as the reconciler and Savior of our souls. That alone is the greatest blessing we can receive from God. May the Lord bless your life abundantly. See you in the next video.